High in the Himalayas, these Indian and Chinese soldiers are clashing on either side of a makeshift border. With their backs to the camera, Indian soldiers fight to push back against an advance by Chinese troops. They use long sticks and throw rocks until the Chinese soldiers eventually begin to retreat. Both sides do have firearms, but a decades-old agreement between the two superpowers prohibits their use. This is just one of several skirmishes between troops in recent years that's happening here along a disputed boundary between India and China. Now the United States is warning encounters like these risk escalating into armed conflict. So, could India and China actually go to war? If history is anything to go by, it is possible, but what are they fighting for, and should the rest of the world be worried? British historian Neville Maxwell describes this region as a no man's land, where nothing grows and no one lives. It's a stretch of disputed territory between the two countries in the mountain passes of the Himalayas, with a de facto border called the Line of Actual Control, though it's not clear who's actually controlling it. It was given that name more than 60 years ago after a previous war broke out. Beijing chose the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis as its moment to strike, but the United States wasn't distracted for long and eventually responded to India's call for help. More than a month into the war, and now with the US on the way, China announced a unilateral ceasefire and soon withdrew.
Any hostile move anywhere in the world against the safety and freedom of peoples to whom we are committed will be met by whatever action is needed.
But India was defeated, and reports suggest at least 7,000 men were either captured or killed. It's not clear how many on China's side died. Beijing retained control over some territory, and the dispute was never resolved. In the years leading up to that war, border skirmishes escalated between troops. Now history could be repeating itself. In 2020, at least 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers were killed when troops clashed in Ladakh in India's northwest. It was a devastating blow between the two countries' relations. There hadn't been bloodshed on the border for nearly 60 years. The dispute made international headlines, with Washington offering to step in.
Prime Minister Modi, he's not in a good mood about what's going on with China. If they thought it would help if I were the mediator or the arbiter, I would do that.
China and India were not openly keen on that idea, and from there, both sides bolstered their presence in the region. Neither has ever confirmed how many soldiers are stationed at the border, but it's believed to be in the tens of thousands. The soldiers have no reprieve from the harsh winter temperatures felt in the Himalayas. The elements did little to thaw tensions. In 2021, in India's Sikkim state, troops on both sides were injured in another clash. Then, in December 2022, soldiers brawled again, this time near the strategically important Tawang sector of the Arunachal Pradesh state. While 2023 remained largely peaceful, Tawang has increasingly become one of the most active spots along the line of actual control. This strategically important Indian territory is wedged between China and Bhutan. New Delhi sees it as a crucial area to monitor China's increasing occupation of Bhutan, and India's becoming worried. China and India have been in overdrive developing military infrastructure in the region. Both sides have been building new outposts, trenches, and upgrading or building new roads, with the region starting to look more and more like a conflict zone. It's this race to build infrastructure that's further heightening tensions between these superpowers. At an altitude of more than 13,000 feet, The Sela Tunnel is India's golden ticket to more efficient travel through the region. The twin-lane tunnel is being spruiked as the longest of its kind in the world. Its role is to allow faster and smoother access for troops to the frontier, connecting Assam in India's northeast to Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. The foundational stone of the project was laid by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2019. He's been to the region many times since, most recently in February to unveil the tunnel. The election has served as Modi's catalyst for his most recent visit. While he was warmly welcomed by people in the region, his presence did not go down well with China. Beijing has claimed the area as its own, giving Chinese names to 11 locations.
The area of Zhong'un is Chinese territory. The Chinese government has never recognised the so-called Arunachal Pradesh, illegally set up by India, and firmly opposes it. India has no right to arbitrarily develop the area. China strongly deplores and firmly opposes the Indian leader's visit to the east section of the China-India boundary.
India was quick to reject a diplomatic protest from China, saying China is making absurd claims, adding Arunachal Pradesh was, is, and will always be an integral and inalienable part of India. This most recent war of words is again attracting another player.
The United States recognizes Arunachal Pradesh as Indian territory, and we strongly oppose any unilateral attempts to advance territorial claims by incursions or encroachments, military or civilian, across the line of actual control.
China has slammed the United States for interfering, saying the India-China border is a matter between the two countries and has nothing to do with Washington.
It is known to all that the US has consistently spared no efforts to provoke and take advantage of other countries' conflicts to serve its selfish geopolitical interests.
For its part, the US says it wants to maintain the international rules-based order. But what does that mean? A recent unclassified annual threat assessment by US intelligence says
China has the capability to directly compete with the United States and US allies and to alter the rules-based global order in ways that support Beijing's power and form of governance over that of the United States.
Put simply, the United States views China as a threat to its interests in the region.
Sporadic encounters between opposing forces risk miscalculation and escalation into armed conflict.
Some analysts believe the tit-for-tat at the border could be a distraction for what's going on elsewhere.
When China pushes at the border, India has to react to that. It's a very tactile issue. It's land, it's territory. And that may take India's attention off the naval domain, which is probably China's real prize.
While India has reportedly bolstered its troop numbers by up to 10,000 at the border, it's pulled soldiers out of a nearby island nation. China has been expanding its presence from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, and it's made it clear the Maldives is firmly in its sights. Removing Indian troops was an election promise set by the Maldives President Mohamed Muizzu, who came into power in November 2023. While the country has historically had a close relationship with New Delhi, that is starting to change. The new president is being courted by Beijing and is widely seen as pro-China. Beijing has loaned more than $1 billion to the Maldives, mostly for infrastructure and development, and the Maldives government has recently signed a military assistance agreement with China.
And that's because a huge percentage, somewhere around 3/4 of China's trade, energy trade in particular, flows through the Indian Ocean. So when China thinks about wartime scenarios, the ability to keep those lines of trade open, the maritime domain really is the prize.
But if a major conflict was to erupt on land or sea, who would New Delhi turn to? The answer is not as clear as it seems. India is part of the quadrilateral security dialogue known as the Quad, including Australia, the United States and Japan. A joint statement following a meeting of the group last year took a veiled swipe at Beijing's activity in the Indo-Pacific. China has denounced the Quad as a Cold War construct and a clique targeting other countries. While New Delhi's involvement in the Quad has done little to ease India-China relations, it's still attempting to walk a fine line between the interests of the East and West. India is also part of BRICS, an intergovernmental organisation comprising of several countries, including China, Russia and Iran. Despite joining the Quad, Narendra Modi has been reluctant to denounce Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. China has been ambivalent. By all accounts, both China and India seem to be preparing for a larger conflict in the region. Many are asking, could these two nuclear-armed neighbours actually go to war? The answer to that could be found in what plays out at the border.